All right, let's record. Is this recording? It's recording. Okay. I apologize if the sound quality is not super great on this. I am recording on my telephone while I'm driving through the middle of British Columbia. I apologize if it sounds like I'm doing YouTuber voice or podcaster voice. I don't really like my voice, so if I ever have to record something or if I ever have to give a speech, I try and sound like people on the internet do. And I probably don't have to do that. I'm driving in a car right now. I'm by myself. I definitely won't be recording these things at home because I am very self-conscious and I live with my wife and my 3 extremely large children. That's not a value judgment. They're 16, 17, and 22. And 2 of them are about as big as me. So they're pretty big. And I don't like speaking where anyone can hear me. I don't really like doing anything creative where people can see me or hear me or observe me and collapse the quantum waveform and bring the universe of cringe down upon me. Which is very difficult because I have spent my entire life wanting to be a creator. And wanting to be a creator, but not wanting to be observed doing it at any stage is really difficult. So this toppertime video is going to be cobbled together from, I'm pretty sure this one is just going to be voice recordings made in the car and the occasional video recorded in the car while I'm driving through beautiful, sunny, supernatural British Columbia. And even though it's sunny, if you check in the upper right and left-hand corners of the video at certain times, you will definitely see darkness and snow and the fact that winter doesn't like to let go here until about May. So hi everybody. I dropped my notes. I'm Topper. This is Topper Time. I'm just some guy who really likes Noah Samsen videos a lot. I forget exactly how I got into him. I'm almost certain it would have to be a Thought Slime eyeball zone, something or other. The eyeball zone is how I found a lot of people. And that's how I found Noah Samsen's original videos. And from Noah Samsen, I found Noah Time, which is this small little channel that does small little videos for ADHD weirdos like me. All the body doubling and cleaning stuff was really wholesome content, and him just babbling over these videos with whatever was on his mind at the time. And other people have made their own various time videos on the Noah Time Discord, and I figured, me too, pay attention to me, so here I am. I didn't script this. I wrote down some notes, and this has been an issue for my entire life. I'm looking at the notes and having a panic attack like, why did I write that down? That's stupid. I don't want to talk about that. Years and years and years ago, God, I was elementary school. Had to be grade 6. Anyway, there was the talent show competition, and that's back when I wanted to be a creator. So I was auditioning for the talent show with a comedy routine. And because I was in grade 6, I was a kid, I was an idiot, it was all jokes from other comedians I'd seen on TV. And things that made me laugh. And I told these jokes to my friend groups, and they'd laughed. So I figured, hey, what the hell, I could do this on the stage. And I had all these jokes written down. And I got up to do the audition, and once I was in front of people who weren't my friends, I started panicking, and I'm going through all the jokes on the page, and I'm like, why did I write this down? Why did I write this? What's going on here? And I told like 2 of them, I got a half-hearted chuckle, I sat down, and I was not accepted for the talent show. I feel this sums up my creative history pretty well. It's not all nothing, it's not all useless. Like, as a creator, I am a writer. That's all I've ever wanted to be. Been writing stories my entire life. First day of grade 4, first day of class, everybody had to like write a poem about either the summer vacation they just had or about autumn that we were just going into. And I wrote a poem about autumn. And through some series of events, the teacher liking it so much, some other faculty must have been involved at some point, this poem ended up in the Vancouver province, which is the second largest newspaper in the whole province. My poem about autumn, which was just some crap I wrote off the top of my head, ended up in the second largest newspaper. And I think I probably got a big head from that. And I thought, wow, I'm a pretty good writer. All these stories that I've been consuming my entire life have created something inside of me, something magical and special and shit like that. Some sort of alchemy. I had something that set me apart. I had something that made me different. And I really latched onto that because I was a very boring child. I think they had autism back in the day. I think ADHD was the new hotness. But my dad didn't believe in that sort of stuff. So there was never a diagnosis of anything. But I tell you, modern ADHD content is basically just me pointing at the screen, doing that meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where Leo DiCaprio is pointing at the screen. Every ADHD video is like, oh, who put me up there? That's strange. And all this is to say that there was a lot of hyper-focus on writing. I think the next appropriate story for how that worked out was, I think it was grade 8, because that would have been Mr. Mason. That would have been my first really good supportive English teacher. We had to write a short story about utopia, for whatever that meant to us. And the rules for it were it had to be at least 2,000 words. And everybody in the class groaned like, oh my God, I have to write at least 2,000 words. That is so many words. How do you expect me to do that? And I handed in 35,000 words, which, had I known at the time, was basically a novella. And I also think I missed the point of the assignment, because it wasn't really about utopia. I wrote some weird cyberpunk story about, like, what was frankly a dystopia, or at least my interpretation of it at that young age when I didn't know anything. Heavily influenced by all the movies and science fiction books that I'd read, and also heavily influenced by the Rifts role-playing game and the GURPS role-playing games, because boy did we have a lot of role-playing games and a lot of fluff. So much fun media. And I won't go into what the story was about. It sucks. It's boring. It was completely unedited, but I handed in this monster of a manuscript, and my teacher just laughed and read a couple of pages of it and gave me an A and told me not to do that again. But in a way, that was him being really supportive. Because I've handed in assignments, writing assignments, and the teachers had just eye-rolled and said, like, I'm not reading that. But this was over the top. This was taking the cake for me. And since then, I've written, like, I don't know how many short stories, how many millions of words of short stories online under various names, occasionally finding an audience. There was a stretch where I had a Patreon that was actually paying for groceries. But once I was writing for money, once I was writing with a Patreon, and suddenly, like, people had input, like all Patreons, I had higher tiers where you could, like, take part in the stories, or make suggestions, or have your characters in the stories. Once that happened, it completely ceased being fun. It started being work. And knowing that I was writing something, not for my friend group, but I was writing something for an authority. And that's the funny thing about authority, because these people who were paying me, because there was money involved, because there was their money involved, that was a form of power over me. In a very tenuous way, and it could be argued that I had the power because they were paying me, so it was my product that was being produced and they had to like it or not. But for me, that was just, they had the power, they had the authority, they were giving me this money, and if I did not provide the appropriate service, I would be failing them. And if there's one thing I cannot stand, it's disappointing somebody else. Anybody, in any way, at any time, at any possible viewpoint, disappointing them would mean that I had failed, that I was a failure. And if there's one thing that I could not fail at, I would not allow myself to fail at, it was writing, because that was the one thing that made me special, the one thing that made me different. Remember all that magical alchemy stuff. So before long, I shut down the Patreon, which, from a different viewpoint, would have meant that I'd failed at writing. But as the popular saying goes, you can't fail if you don't try. So I stopped trying, and therefore could never fail. And then I stopped writing almost completely. Starting in about 2019. Horrible family stuff happened in 2019. Made it difficult to write. 2020, there was some flu. I don't know if you heard about that. 2021, everything sort of went insane on the world stage and the internet in which I dwelled. 2022, more family horribleness. 2023, the world was not better, but I started a new job, and it was a pay cut, but I went from the private engineering consulting world, which had become basically just oil and gas and pipelines. I went from that to the public sector. I went from that to a government position as a bridge designer. The world might not need more oil pipelines, but we kind of need bridges. And that was a job that I could feel good about. It was a pay cut, there's no overtime, but I feel so much better about myself. I'm not going home on a Friday panicking about what's going to happen on Monday morning. I'm not being given a job on a Thursday that's got about 40 hours of work, being told it's due Friday and we're out of budget. I'm not being sent out of town on no notice to do a steel inspection in the Yukon. I'm not doing the exact same steep slope engineering drawing for heavy pipeline equipment with slightly different numbers over and over and over and over and over again. I have a job that I like. How weird is that? And I kinda started writing again. Hold on, I'm driving directly towards a truck right now. Okay, he changed lanes. Jesus Christ, buddy. Anyway, I'm still alive. I started writing again. I started trying to put all these novels that I've been fooling around with. I'm sure in later Topper times I'll get into these novels more. I do like to talk about them with anybody who will listen, which is no one. I finished off a couple of short stories. I got published in an anthology, and more horrible family stuff happened. But maybe by this point I'm starting to, I don't want to say deadened or desensitized or insulated, but I think I'm starting to find ways to not let it completely send me into a toilet spiral of despair. So I'm still writing. I've had a podcast for almost a year now. In terms of actually doing our recordings, it's been more than a year. And I started that podcast under some pretty horrible situations. Like, the third episode was recorded just days after I had been T-boned at an intersection by a Dodge Ram. And I still had bruises all over my chest, and one of my shoulders didn't work right. And I recorded the third episode of the podcast. Fifth or sixth episode of the podcast was reported right after my best friend from childhood died. And my co-host asked me, like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, absolutely. I need to do something normal. I need to do something to make me smile. That was the one person who was excited for this podcast to come out. And the first episode hadn't even been released yet. So he passed away before even hearing a single episode of this show that he was super thrilled about. So I felt there was no way that I could not go on and keep recording. And we've put out almost 50 episodes now. And I think we're in the 40s. And I've managed to keep doing that through all this stuff. And that's also helped me want to write more. The podcast is about the books of Clive Cussler, specifically the Dirk Pitt novels. There's 25 of those, so I figure we got 5 years of content just on the OG Cussler books. But now because of that, I want to try my hand at writing a Cussler-esque, Dirk Pitt-esque, probably not novel, but say a novella. Because we just finished book 5, we're starting book 6 very shortly, and boy, do we have the pattern, the formula down. And I want to try something in that pattern, in that formula. In the 1970s, 1980s, macho, globe-trotting, secret agent, professor, sex hound, asshole, action hero, adventure style. Only doing it from a slightly more modern viewpoint. That always sounds really smug and condescending when someone says, well, from a modern viewpoint. But I have ideas for a protagonist who has all of the same sort of skill sets as these action-adventure heroes do, which is to say they have all the skill sets that are needed at any given time, but also reflects more of my life and my experiences. So this is probably going to be somebody with ADHD, borderline autism. I really hope that they are going to completely miss all of these signals that the various gorgeous women he encounters on his adventures are going to send his way. Maybe when he gets mixed up in the politics of other countries, he doesn't just kill everybody who doesn't support American capitalism. We'll see how it goes. Well, I have completely deviated from all the notes I had for this. I didn't even think I was supposed to talk about my short stories. Man, I was going to talk about fitness. Screw it. I'll do that next time, just because I think my next video might be done over a recording of me moving all my weights up into the garage now that it's almost summertime. Now, by almost summertime, I mean it's not below freezing in the morning. How much recording do I have? Dang, 20 minutes. Well, who knows what this will be edited down to. We'll say that's a good introduction. This is the first topper time. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about. I'm probably going to have to edit all this out. Yeah, I can't really think of a good way to segue into that. What would Noah do in a situation like this?
Say it with me. Start a small business. Start a small business.
Well, starting a small business doesn't really help. So right now I am driving home through beautiful, supernatural British Columbia. I'm going to keep calling it that, because this was the first government ministry all-staff conference that I've ever been to. I've been at this government job for about a year and a half, and they have these all-staff conferences every 2 years, so I just missed the previous one. And mostly it's meetings, seminars, it's lessons learned, it's presentations from all the various departments. But the one thing that I'm going to remember most about this conference was the hour-long GBA/DEI seminar we had to have, and that is the Gender-Based Analysis / Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion seminar that we had to do. And I'll be honest, I kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. We had all these assignments we had to do based on our table. Each table had 5 or 6 people. And once this meeting started, and once the paper started getting handed out, once we started getting given our assignments, boy, could you tell the people around the room who were, let's say, men of a certain age, who absolutely did not want to be there and thought all of this was bullshit. One such one was at my table, and about halfway through he just leaned in. He had the big smile on his face because he thought all this was silly, and he made the valid point that nobody's ever made before, that the point of all this is to, not pay any attention to gender and diversity and treat everybody equally, but isn't doing these exercises just paying so much attention to gender and diversity? Aren't we doing the exact opposite? And he got some very mild pushback from me and some other people at the table and shut down. Like, he made his line, he made his innocent little joke, and it flopped. And he just frowned and sat back and pulled out his phone. He was on his phone for the rest of the seminar. He did not look up, he did not talk to us, he did not join in on any of the discussion. And you could see this happening to probably one, maybe two people at every single table. Towards the end of it, one of the women made some valid points about when they were just starting out in the ministry and they weren't allowed to go and do field inspections because it would be too dangerous. But a few days later, a man with less experience was allowed to go do those field inspections, and it wasn't too dangerous for them. And this was seen as an excellent point by the person who was hosting the seminar, and a hand went up at the back of the room, and somebody said, well, I don't remember exactly, there was a lot that was said, but they started going back and forth, well, like, you know, in general, women are smaller, in general, women are weaker, like, there are important biological differences between men and women, and you could hear so many breaths being sucked in through teeth, like, this guy's just like saying all this stuff out loud, and there was a couple of guys who were about his age nodding along, but I did appreciate that most of the room was absolutely not here for that. And I really wanted to respond, but the person who was heading the seminar, like, okay, well, we're going to move on from this. And we moved on. We only had like 5 minutes left anyways. That was an awkward experience all around. But I wanted to point out that as long as we're talking, you know, averages here, like the average woman is smaller and weaker than the average man, 50% of men are, like, mathematically speaking, smaller and weaker than the other 50% of men. So where's the cutoff line? At what point does a man become too small and too weak to be sent out on these dangerous field inspections where it's rough and tumble, and what if they were assaulted? Because there are, being honest here, some very small men in this group. There's about 70 of us, 60 of them are men. So statistically, some of them are going to be smaller. Some of them are going to be weaker. Weaker sounds like a judgment call, so let's just say some of them are going to be able to bench press less than other men. And I know for a fact that the smallest one has been sent on many field inspections with no problems. And the woman who pointed out that she wasn't being sent on field inspections because it was too dangerous is 5'9" and works out. Too dangerous. And there was a lot of talk about this seminar at basically every coffee break we had for the rest of the conference. And I think the general consensus is this is why we have seminars like this. But on the other hand, these are people who are very unlikely to change their viewpoints. They are in their 50s. They have high positions in the government. They have gotten this far in life with the beliefs that they have, so it could be said that these beliefs have served them well. So they are very unlikely to be logicked out of these positions when they've worked so far. Because if they got logicked out of these positions, then that might indicate that they were wrong. And they cannot be wrong. Their identity is tied to these beliefs that they have. I'm sure this could be compared to something in politics happening in the States right now. I don't know for sure. But when you're tying beliefs and your view about yourself, your self-image, trying to logic out of them is almost impossible and will create this intense pushback. It will create intense discomfort. It will create pain and anger and confusion. And you'll fight back against these ideas which are attacking one second, there's a motorcycle passing. They'll fight back against these ideas that are attacking their beliefs, that are tied to their self-esteem and their self-image. But if they don't try, then they can't fail. If they don't try to change, then they can't fail at changing. If they don't try to change, then they will stay in their comfort zone. And I don't want to be like those people. I want to try, and hell, I want to fail. Because as the other popular saying goes, failing at something is the first step to being sort of good at something. In more practical terms, as a writer, you can't edit something that doesn't exist. All this time I've spent not finishing a first draft has been wasted. I could have banged out a first draft, like 120, 150, 180,000 word first draft. Based on past performance, I could have bashed one out in 6 months. So based on the last 5 years, I could have banged out 10 first draft manuscripts. Instead, I have 0 first draft manuscripts and a shitload of outlines. And the outlines have not changed much lately. The outlines are done. They're very done. They are probably too done. There was too much detail in these outlines. But I need to finish a first draft. Because a first draft can be edited. Or hell, a first draft can just be what you hold up and say, here was my first attempt at this story. Pop it in a drawer for a couple of weeks, take it out, have a read through, see what works and what doesn't. Find ways to fix what didn't work now that you can see the entire thing. Then write the second draft. The second draft should fix all the structural problems. That second draft can be put in a drawer for a couple of weeks, take it out, and now you begin the editing. Begin line edits. You begin adding color, adding flavor. Things that you don't need to do in the first draft. Or even the second draft. But you can't edit something that doesn't exist. If any of you have seen me on Discord, you probably know that my status is currently set to the phrase mandatory failure. And only 1 or 2 people have asked about that. They ask if everything's okay. And I have to explain that, yeah, actually, that is an incredibly positive and affirming quote for me. There is a webcomic called Schlock Mercenary by Howard Taylor. If there's any writers out there, you've probably listened to at least one episode of Writing Excuses, so you know all about Howard Taylor and his many adventures with the comic of Schlock Mercenary over the years, which ran daily for, 20 years? A daily comic for 20 years? And some of you might think, that's not too hard. It's only 3 panels. It's only 3 panels, but you have to have hundreds of comics line up and make sense. And he rarely worked more than a few episodes in advance. So I feel that was fairly impressive. Anyway, one thing that recurs throughout these 20 years of Schlock Mercenary is the book, The 70 Maxims of Maximally Effective Mercenaries. And a bunch of the maxims are humorous. A lot of them people in the military would probably find highly amusing and relevant and accurate. Stuff about aerial bombardment and friendly fire, and nothing more dangerous than a second lieutenant with a gun and a map. But the 70th maxim of maximally effective mercenaries is failure is not an option, failure is mandatory. What's optional is whether or not you let that be the last thing you do. And I am not going to let failure be the last thing I do. This directly counters the premise that if you don't try, you can't fail. It took me a long time to come around to realizing that not trying is perhaps the quintessence of failure. It is failure to even attempt. It is failing at something that anyone can do, because anyone can try anything. I could try mountain climbing. I will fail 15 minutes into my first exercise, but I tried. I have already succeeded more than the person who doesn't even try their first exercise. So I am not going to fail at being a writer because I didn't try in order to save myself the pain of failure. I am going to try harder than I've ever tried before. And ironically, that's easier than you think. Because for a lot of my stories that I've put out there, a lot of the ones I like, a lot of the ones people like, a lot of the ones I got paid for, I didn't try all that hard. I sat down, I had a rough idea in mind, I hammered out what made sense to me, in a lot of cases not knowing what I was going to type next, not knowing what the next scene, what the next piece of dialogue was going to be, seeing where it took me, and by the end I was like, oh, that was pretty good. Very, very few revisions, maybe the occasional touch-up, going through and getting rid of some repetition, fixing the grammar. But never did I go back and say, well, I don't really like this scene, I'm going to completely rewrite this scene. I would always think, well, I've already written that scene. It works, it's good enough. And I know I can do better than that. As now I look back at stories I wrote 5, 10, 15 years ago that I liked at the time, that people liked at the time, that people paid me for, and I can see like the 10 major and 100 minor things I would have done to make it better. I could make those stories better. Better than I would have thought possible at the time. So not only am I not going to not try, I'm not going to not try so I can't fail. I think that makes sense. I'm not going to do that, but I am also going to try harder and make it the best goddamn story I possibly can. So, I think that these topper times are also going to be a bit of a chronicle as to how my first drafts are coming. Leave a comment down below if that sounds interesting. I don't know. I've never said leave a comment down below before. Like and subscribe. I think I've always wanted to say that. Alright, it's raining. This is going to be hard to record soon. So I think that's enough topper time for today. You're all sick of me by now. Goodbye, everybody.